Hey, barbecue gathering, what's up? It's the Culture Detective here investigating your favorite movies. And right now it is 10:42 p.m. on February 27th. I'm so running out of time and for the last week or so, I have struggled with trying to make YouTube videos because I always run out of time for doing anything, including watching movies. I have so many movies planned to watch, but I keep postponing them again and again and again and again because I always run out of time. But anyways, today we're going to do a pretty special video. I'm going to be doing a movie review, and I've done this before. I'm going to review several movies in a row, but there's a theme to it this time. This time I'm going to review only Hong Kong movies. So if you have followed my channel for a little bit, you know that I have these Hong Kong movie review sessions where for about 1.5 months I would watch seven Hong Kong movies and review them one by one. But because I'm running out of time, I don't have time to do an individual review for every single one of them. From now on, every time I do these Hong Kong movie watching and reviewing sessions, I'm just going to do one of these videos where I talk about all of the 7 movies I watched in a row in one video. So starting off, we have The Private Eyes from the year 1976, in Cantonese 半斤八兩. It is written and directed by Michael Hu, or Hu Gunman. And I've been wanting to watch this movie for a very, very long time. Why? Because this movie, The Private Eyes, is a classic. It is a classic film in Hong Kong. It is widely regarded in Hong Kong as one of the greatest comedies of Hong Kong. It is basically the Monty Python and the Holy Grail of Hong Kong. And this is also one of the most 70s things I've ever seen, and it came from the 70s, but this is more 70s than any 70s film I've ever seen, and I don't know why. It's not like I've seen that many films from the 70s, to be honest, but this is just so 70s, and I really like the style. I'm really enjoying seeing my home city in the 70s. It's like traveling through time. It just has so much charm to it. The jokes, for the most part, actually land. I mean, yeah, it's mostly physical comedy and cheap gags on the same plane as British comedy. Yeah, it's kind of cheap, but still, they are really, really enjoyable. They really, really land for me. I've seen comedies from Hong Kong, and usually the jokes are cringy and they fall flat, but in 1976, they don't fall flat. They're totally fine, and they're actually kind of funny. And there are tons of memorable scenes and great lines in this movie, and the story is a little bit all over the place. The story structure is kind of loose, and usually I dislike that, but in this movie it worked kind of well. It actually makes this movie feel more charming and playful. And again, so many memorable scenes. The fight scene with the sausage and the flying pan, the scene where the main character was about to be beat up and he wants to whisper a code into a secret mic in his shirt. 阿弥陀佛, 阿弥陀佛. That was hilarious. And the car chase scene is hysterical. The final scene, the cinema robbery, iconic. Freaking hilarious. So, I actually really enjoyed this movie. This is now one of my favorite comedies from Hong Kong, and also one of my favorite films from Hong Kong in general. I'm giving The Private Eyes, or 半斤八兩, an 8 out of 10. If you want to get into Hong Kong films, this one to go. Also, this is Hong Kong humor, and humor is subjective in different cultures. So even if you don't get this one, do appreciate that this is like the epitome of Hong Kong humor. It really is. Alright. Next up, I watched The Soong Sisters, or Song Wangqiu, a film from 1997 directed by Mabel Zheng, or Zheng Wenting, a female director, by the way. One thing I've noticed is that the male to female ratio in the film industry in Hong Kong is a little bit more balanced than it is in the West. which is kind of impressive. But anyways, let's talk about the Soong Sisters. Boy, am I disappointed. Now, I love Chinese history and Chinese culture, and I love Chinese period films. I salivate for them. But this one is just kind of drab because the film tries to show some of the most serious and some of the most sophisticated history in recent Chinese history in a very cartoonish and ham-fisted way. And another thing about this film is that if you don't know anything about recent Chinese history, this film will just leave you absolutely confused. Understanding Chinese history is pretty much a prerequisite for this film. Fortunately, I do understand that quite a bit, especially after the recent political movements. But yeah, again, this movie is quite disappointing. It is a movie that is basically like a biopic about three sisters, the Soong sisters, because their last names are Soong. And this actually happened in real life, by the way. The eldest Soong sister got married to a rich guy. The second Soong sister got married to Sun Zhongshan, or in English, Sun Yat-sen, who is the father of revolution in China, the man responsible for overthrowing Qing dynasty. That is a huge deal. Overthrowing a monarchy is a huge freaking deal. The man did it. He is the father of Chinese revolution. And everybody knows that. The second sister, Song Qinglin, is married to Sun Zhongshan, and then the third sister, Song Meilin, is married to Chiang Kai-shek, who is the leader of the Nationalist Party of China, aka Kuomintang, who later fled to Taiwan after the Civil War. But yeah, that's basically a very brief description of what happened. Now, this film is a biopic of these three sisters, but it also uses these three sisters as an excuse to basically describe this period of time in Chinese history. Thus, it does a really half-assed job at actually portraying this part in Chinese history, because this movie focuses a lot on these sisters, and it makes sense because it's a biopic, but then it tries to sneak in these snippets of history, but instead of talking about them in detail, it just kind of skims over them with like a montage with poor editing. And it's just incredibly underwhelming. And again, this movie is very cartoonish and ham-fisted. Like when Song Meilin and Chiang Kai-shek married, the film has to emphasize how much they have a huge freaking crush on each other the moment they share the same scene. And then every time Sun Zhongshan is on screen, he's also talking about how much he wants revolution, and how nearly every time Chiang Kai-shek is on screen, he's complaining about communism. Communism is evil, and that's basically his thing in the movie. These are real people with real history, but it's watered down to such a level of cartoonishness. I just can't take this movie all that seriously. And it's such a shame because this film has a huge production value. Like the budget is really high. The set pieces are really impressive and they have great potential, but unfortunately the story is mediocre, the characters are underdeveloped, and every single scene is so full of music, and the makeup is not convincing at all. Like in the final few scenes in the film tries to show the last two remaining sisters, but old. They're old now, and it is not convincing at all. One thing I can say for sure is that Maggie Zheng Man-yuk's performance in this movie, stellar, amazing. That's without a doubt. And Michelle Yeoh is real good as well. But everything else is just kind of underwhelming, unfortunately. So yeah, 6 out of 10. The third film I watched from Hong Kong is Police Story, or 警察故事, directed by Jackie Chan, Seng Long, and it is from the year 1985. This film is another classic from Hong Kong. Maybe not as classic as半斤八兩 or The Private Eyes, but still it is a classic, and it is one of the films that put Jackie Chan on the map. And for a long time, I've been salivating for a Hong Kong action movie because for the last few years, I've not seen a true gritty Hong Kong action movie with impressive stunts and fighting set pieces. And I really, really want to watch that. And I am satisfied after watching Police Story. Even though the story is kind of formulaic and predictable, the main character is a cop and he's a good guy. He has to fight some bad guys and he runs into some trouble, but at the end he wins. You know that story. You've heard it a million times before, but it is still so much fun. The action is exhilarating. The opening scene for the film, where Jackie Chan hangs onto the tram with an umbrella, amazing. I love it. And then the ending scene where Jackie Chan slides down a hanging strip of lights in the middle of a mall. That is one of the most impressive shots and one of the most iconic shots in Hong Kong cinematic history. I'm not even lying. And yeah, it does get slow in the middle parts of the movie, but the movie still manages to get really creative with its action. Action doesn't have to occur only during fights. In an action, it can happen in daily life as well. Like there's a scene where Jackie Chan accidentally stepped on some poop and he tried to rub it off by moonwalking. And then a little bit later, he had to pick up 4 phones at the same time at a police station, and he does so by hanging the phones on his 4 limbs. It's very creative and it's humorous, it's funny, and Cho Yun is in this movie as well, which is really cool. I'll talk about him a little bit later, but for now, 警察故事 or Police Story, good film. 8 out of 10. Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit awkward now, given the police brutality in Hong Kong, but still a good movie. I have to admit that. The 4th film I watched is 天下可憐父母心from the year 1960. The English name is The Great Devotion, and it is directed by Cho Yun, who recently passed away. And by recently, I mean like 4 days ago, which is very shocking because it's not been too long since I've watched this film. And yeah, rest in peace to one of the most important and influential early directors of Hong Kong cinema. Now, ever since last year, I've been into old films. I've been wanting to watch more and more old black and white films in the 60s and prior. And I kind of want to do the same thing for Hong Kong films. Like once in a while, I would love to see an old vintage black and white film from Hong Kong. And luckily enough, I got to watch The Great Devotion on YouTube before it is taken down. And I can't find it anywhere else. It's not on streaming services. It's not on anywhere. It's not on any websites. You can't find it anywhere. And even on YouTube, it's still low quality and it's kind of like a bootleg. And it's just sad. So many great Hong Kong films are being obscured and buried. But The Great Devotion is actually a pretty great film, in my opinion. While this is actually the second vintage old black and white film from Hong Kong I've seen. The first one I've seen is Mambo Girl, Mambo Lou Long, from the year 1957, which I thought is not bad, but also kind of underwhelming. Like, it's just a little musical thing with a so-so story. But this one, though, way different. Way different. This film is way more tragic and emotional than I thought it would be. This is a story about a family who is falling apart because they have no money. The kids are starving, the parents are unemployed, and it's just tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. The last 15 minutes is overwhelming as hell. It is kind of rushed actually, where it's just a lot of sad things happening at the same time, super fast, rapidly, and I was actually kind of surprised and shocked. There's a scene in this film that's just particularly heart-wrenching and just tragic. That really made me go, God, what? Ugh. But even though it is a little bit rushed, especially towards the end, I feel like the movie definitely conveyed its message very clearly, and the child acting in this movie is actually really, really good. Also, I really like that there is a film from the 60s in Cantonese because usually early films in Hong Kong are in Mandarin. But for certain film production companies, they allow Cantonese to be spoken. And so it is just so cool to hear my own mother language, my own mother tongue, but 80 years ago. And that's awesome. So yeah, rest in peace to Chou Yun, but great film. Also, before I watched this film, I actually didn't know which one to watch because 天下可憐父母心 is the one I watched, but actually there's another film called 父母心, and the title is kind of similar, and one is from 1955, one is from 1960. They're both equally as popular, and I don't know which one to watch. But at the end, I chose this one, and I like it. 8 out of 10. The fifth film I watched is Black Comedy, or Haksak Heikak, from the year 2014, and it is directed by Wilson Chin, Qin Guokwei, and more importantly, it is written by the notorious, the prolific screenwriter from Hong Kong, Wong Zeng, who is really well known for writing lowbrow, cheap humor. You know, pee, poop, fart jokes, sex and drugs. That's the funny thing. Haha. Not even drugs. It's too edgy. Just sex. Yeah, this film is the worst Hong Kong film I've seen so far in my entire life. So bad that I had to do a full-length movie review on it. Check it out. Link in the description. Yeah, what can I say? This is I watched this movie because I realized that I haven't watched enough bad Hong Kong movies and I really want to actively find some terrible ones. And it's not that difficult to find bad Hong Kong movies. It's littered all over the place. And 80% of the times, these bad movies are written by Wong Zeng because he always runs out of creative ideas. So what does he do? He writes about jokes about sex and pee, poop, fart. That's... it's painfully unfunny. I mean, yeah, in a technical standpoint, this film is absolute trash. Music bad, acting terrible, dialogue terrible. The editing, don't even begin talking about the editing. Oh my god. But if it's funny, at least I could give it that. But the problem is that this movie isn't even funny. It's just so unfunny, and it's kind of even boring too. And it's embarrassing. The main character is played by Wong Zhoulam, who is someone that I used to know, and he also used to know me a little bit personally. Like, I've personally seen him before. Like, he used to know my mom, but he fell off. He fell off. 1 out of 10. I almost forgot to say the score. 1 out of 10. Sixth film I watched from Hong Kong is Center Stage, or Yun Ling Yok, from the year 1991. It is directed by Stanley Kwan, Guan Gengpang. And Stanley Kwan is a filmmaker whom I have looked up to for quite a bit because a year ago, or I think a couple years ago, I watched him film Rouge, Yin Zikao, from the year 1987, also from Hong Kong, and it is now one of my favorite Hong Kong films ever. It is a slow-paced but beautiful, poetic, sad, eerie, ominous horror film. Horror-flavored romance film, if you will. And it is directed by Stanley Kwan, and I was honestly super freaking impressed by Rouge. So Stanley Kwan in 1991 released Center Stage, Yun Ling Yok, which is a 2.5 hour long biopic about the incredibly famous Chinese actress of Yun Ling Yok, who is the Marlene Dietrich of China. And she is an actress in the silent film eras in the 1920s and 30s, and she killed herself at the peak of her career. And she is portrayed by none other than the one and only Maggie Zheng Man-yuk, and she is amazing in this film. She is her performance is stellar in this film, to say the least. And There are several versions of this film. The theatrical version is 2 hours long, but the director's cut is 2.5 hours long. And I actually watched the director's cut. And I'm not gonna lie, this film, super slow paced. This is one of the most slow paced Hong Kong films I've ever seen in my life. Actually, the most. I'm sure of that. And I actually kind of like it, even though it's not super enjoyable. It's not entertaining, not one bit. The story doesn't progress much, but indeed, it looks good. The lighting, the sets, the costumes, good. And this film is also really elegant and delicate when it comes to portraying this actress. I have recently watched a Hong Kong film similar to this last year in the cinema called Anita, Wu Yinfeng, also a biopic. And Center Stage is way better of a biopic than Anita. It does a way better job at portraying this person than Anita does. That being said, though, I still have gripes with this film. Like, in this film, throughout the film, Stanley Kwan decided to interject these bits of interviews that takes place in present time, like these real interviews. It's almost like a documentary. And I like these interviews, I truly do, but they just interject the film and it just kind of interrupts the pacing a little bit. It would be nice if they would include these interview footage in like the extra scenes, but it's just sprinkled all over the film for some reason. Also, the last scene is kind of weird. To a degree, it is experimental to say the least. But in the last scene, the film constantly jumps back and forth to actually being in the movie to behind the scenes of that scene, which is really weird. Like, it constantly just jumps back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, just breaking verisimilitude. And I know it's intentional, and I appreciate the experimentation, but it is just really weird, and it just kind of disrupts the emotional impact of the last scene a little bit. Still, it is a really good movie, I have to admit that. 8 out of 10 for Center Stage, Yun Ling Yong. Finally, the seventh film I've seen from Hong Kong is the 36th Chamber of Shaolin, or the older name is actually The Master Killer, which is just literally not the translation of the Cantonese title at all. The Cantonese/Chinese title of the film is Siu Lam 36房, I believe. It is from the year 1978, and it is another classic film. It is a classic, iconic film directed by Lau Gale. And holy shit, I love this film. I absolutely love this film. So much so that I made a full-length individual movie review for it. Definitely check it out. But essentially what I love about this film is many things, but mainly it is a Chinese period film from a period of time that is rarely shown in Hong Kong cinema, which is the part of Qing Dynasty where people are trying to overthrow Qing Dynasty and restore Ming Dynasty, and also martial arts in Hong Kong, which is, as always, awesome. This movie, even though it's 2 hours long, it is very tight-paced, very freaking entertaining. I love the cinematography, I love the editing, the acting is actually pretty good, the colors are actually pretty good, and it's just good. It's just really freaking great, actually. Like, I didn't expect myself to love this so much. Like, when I started watching it, I'm like, okay, interesting start. And then scene after scene after scene, I'm like, oh, oh, I like it. I like it. Give me more. Oh, oh. Like, I don't know why. Maybe it's because to a degree I relate to the story, because the main character in this movie is oppressed, and not only oppressed but also oppressed by the Chinese government. Like, I can relate to that on a personal level, and I guess that kind of helped. But also the idea of the main character, because he is oppressed, he felt the need to train himself and go somewhere far away and go through this harsh, grueling training. And that's like where I'm at right now. And I kind of relate to that somehow. And it's kind of awesome. Just watching him succeed just makes me want to succeed. it's just awesome, really. It's such a freaking awesome film. So yeah, I mean it inspired Wu-Tang Clan. So what can I say? Classic film, awesome film, light 9 out of 10. Highly recommend if you want to start watching Hong Kong films. This one is the one to go, man. Damn good film. So yeah, these are the 7 films I've seen from Hong Kong. From 1 to 10, how much do you rate them? Like, we like them, and subscribe if you want more. And thanks for watching.